everybody, it is Romania Black, and we're on episode 14 of March Comes in Like a Lion. Oh, last episode, Smith went up against Goto, and it did not end well. He is promptly out of the competition, and Goto has advanced to the final of this Lion King Shogi tournament. And now in the semifinals, what's the other round that's left is Rei versus Shimada, who is maybe a figurative brother to Nikaido, maybe a biological half-brother to Nikaido. I'm thinking it's more figurative, but it could also be like a half-brother. We don't know Nikaido's family very well. They seem to have different last names, but who knows? Maybe we'll find out more this episode. But I was thinking about it today, and I think that the big stark difference, and we talked about it last week, is that going into this semifinal match, Smith was saying he could not envision a scenario where he won against Goto. Whereas Rei has been envisioning him doing well and surviving this whole time. Of course, now it's put to the test because Shimada has this weird, he's like almost so bland that he's like, it's deceptive. He's so bland, he lulls you into a false sense of security, and then you're like, oh wait, I'm losing. So it's going to be interesting to see how Rei combats this going into this episode and what the outcome is going to be. I think that Rei is going to beat him because we have to have Rei versus Goto in the final, but what ends up happening with that, I don't know. So that's going to be the thing to note. I do have a few comments before we start. Liam Poles said the episode 12 end card, they were talking about this in the Discord, is by Vofan, a Taiwanese illustrator that is most famous for the cover art of the Monogatari novels. And I think Monogatari is another series that's done by Shaft. I'm pretty sure. That's all I know about it. But yeah, that's interesting. I'm glad that you gave me that information because it's a really beautiful end card, like episode 12. Although last week's episode 13 end card is actually one of my favorites. That style of artwork and that kind of organized. It's not too simple. It's not too busy. It's just really nice. But I do agree that Vofan's art in episode 12 looks like a background wallpaper for a computer. It's just really well done. I like it a lot. SK Wiggly McJagger 79747 said in episode 11 they had a different interpretation of the dream with Rei, and I really like this scene because there's been several interpretations on YouTube in the comments, and I think it's kind of cool how we don't exactly get dreams are fun because they don't have a direct concrete interpretation. It's just what each of us make of it. So I liked their interpretation, though. Their interpretation is that Rei is constantly having not only a fear of failure, but that the path he's on is not the correct one. And I think that's a very valid fear for people to have, is that you wonder, am I going the right route? Am I making the correct decisions for my future? And I think that Rei, it's so complicated because, you know, on the one hand, he's like, playing shogi correct? Am I doing it for the right reasons? I don't really even like this, or do I like it? And, you know, should I go back to my family? Should I continue to be by myself? Like, there's all these different options that Rei has to go through and kind of decide from, and that's very realistic of our own lives. We have all of these choices, and we have to eventually make decisions, and then we have to live with the consequences of those decisions, whether they are good or bad. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then Sarah S. did mention the chairman, the crazy fisherman chairman. He has been mentioned before his fishy debut. He is actually the benefactor for Rei's apartment, meaning that which makes sense, Rei's a minor, so he kind of co-signs off on it for Rei to let him stay there. Rei still has the money to be able to spend on his food and his rent, but in order to have the lease, an adult has to sign off, and the chairman signed off. And Kyoko had mentioned in prior episodes, according to Sarah S., that the chairman's always had a soft spot for Rei. And I think that that's interesting because it adds another layer of pressure. Rei has been dealing with pressure to not only become a shogi player, but to become a good one and to keep rising up the ladder, because it's not just his own well-being that's in the cards, but it's also the reputation of those around him. And knowing that the chairman is his benefactor, it adds another layer of pressure, like, well, this man's sponsoring you. He's leasing an apartment for you. Are you gonna let him down? And it's like, and that also makes a lot more sense as to why he doesn't just leave and go stay with the sisters in the house. One, because I don't think Ray would impose himself on that, even if he did want to. I don't think he would try to, even though they would take him in with open arms like a damn stray puppy. I don't think he would do that. But also it adds another reason why he can't do that. He's currently being sponsored, so he'd have to tell the chairman that he can't do that anymore. And Ray is kind of, in that vein, a little non-confrontational, so there you go. But I thought that was really cool. I love those comments. Those are all really, really well done. Thank you all very much. I'm excited to dive in this episode. Before we do, really quick though, I want to give a special shout out over to our patrons. Not only thanking those on YouTube that subscribe and those who are patrons on Patreon, because y'all are amazing and I keep doing what I do because of you all, but the people in our philanthropy tier, they get a special shout out each week because they're awesome and because they donate a little bit extra to the cause. So I want to give a shout out to Alex Cornejo, to Anime Annie, to Be Happy, to Bryant Reed, to Dana, to Danger Zone, to Davarin, to Danny Donmai, to Destiny Marie, to Ichu, to Eric, to Ghostly Turnip, to Fisho, to Curie, to Elfreya, to Lyndon, to Matthew Palfinier, to Murphew, to Nicholas, to Nameless Monster, to Sunspots, Trails, Shimoyama, and Translucent Men. Thank you all so much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. All of my love. So yeah, I'm pretty excited, y'all, for this episode. I think that Ray's gonna win, but I don't think it's going to be easy because nothing is ever easy in this series. And that's kind of the fun of it, right? So we're going to start episode 14 of March Comes In Like a Lion. And we're going to do that here in 3, 2, 1, and let's go. Well, I was wrong. Damn. I was very wrong. I thought that Ray had this. I thought Ray was going to take the match. I thought he was going to play Goto. I didn't think he was going to beat Goto. I thought he was going to lose to him. I thought it was going to set up him facing Goto. He was going to lose to Goto, and then that was going to be like his incentive to go back. But I honestly, in hindsight, I think it's better that he lost against Shimada here, because just seeing how depressed he got with losing to Shimada, I don't even want to think about what it would have done to his ego and his psyche if he had gone on and faced Goto, right? And I think this was a very important learning lesson for Ray in a lot of ways, which we're going to incorporate into Whiteboard Kun here. I think it was very important that Ray lost this match in hindsight. But I didn't see it coming. I was so convinced he was going to win because he's the protagonist, right? He's the main character. We think that, oh, even if we know he's not going to beat Goto this round, we're like, he's going to make it to the final, right? No. But I think it was really important to lose against Shimada. It's just that I don't think Ray understands that yet. I don't think Ray can see what the benefit was of learning this lesson now, as opposed to if he had won and faced Goto, like how devastating that would have been. Because Goto, here's the thing, Shimada doesn't rub it in his face. Shimada's like, this is what it is. You lost against me. I've been there before. You'll eventually pick yourself back up. Ray's just got a lot more depression than he lets on, right? But I feel like Goto would have rubbed it in his face. Goto is that kind of slime ball that he would have, even if it was like the subtlest of jabs, he would have jabbed him. Whereas Shimada is not like that. He's a classier individual, which I appreciate quite a bit. But man, we need to talk about this episode. So it's very interesting because Ray's going on a journey with shogi, right? So if we start out with young Ray at the bottom here, like young Ray at the bottom, he was just playing shogi. If we go back to the very beginning, the only reason he was playing shogi was to connect with his biological dad. His bio dad that had a job that used to be a shogi player himself. It was his way to connect with his father, to like have some kind of networking connection between them. That was all that it was. And then after his father dies, he's made the little connector here. Like the latter step is him meeting Koda, right? Through playing with his father, he meets one of his father's old friends that he played against, which was Koda, who's pretty well known in the shogi world. So then we have the next step, which is Child Ray. And Child Ray ends up playing, I'm going to just put PS for playing shogi. He plays shogi in order to escape the orphanage. That's his means of getting away from being sent away to the orphanage, is to escape with Koda through playing shogi. And so that's the next step of the ladder, is by playing shogi for Koda and for his approval, essentially, right? So then we have like preteen Ray, which we could say is middle school Ray, and he's playing shogi for the appreciation and for the duty to Koda. So Koda's a big influence on all of this, obviously, but that kind of leads to that. And then around this time, that's where the whole thing with Kyoko starts, where Kyoko and Ayumu are kind of shunned in the process of this, right? That's kind of the aftermath of this part of the ladder. He shoves Ayumu and Kyoko off the ladder so he himself can stay on the ladder, but it's not just the appreciation of Koda, it's also almost out of obligation and duty, because he's like, you took me in and gave me a home, you saved me from the orphanage, so this is me paying you back, but in order for me to pay you back, I kind of got to play shogi, and me playing shogi, even though I don't like it, is tearing into your relationship with your kids. So that's what starts the whole, like, birds kicking them out of the nest sort of thing. So then this whole business becomes the next step in the ladder. The whole business of Kyoko and Ayumu getting shunned leads to the next step of the ladder, which is our teen Ray, which is where he is now. He is playing shogi to escape from Koda's house. Which it's like, it's this big cycle, right? So he's just using it to escape from Koda's house because he doesn't want Kyoko and Ayumu to suffer, but it's kind of too little too late, right? So here he is trying to do that, and he's playing shogi to pay for his rent that is fueling this escapism, right? Which he could go back home. The teacher brings up, he's like, why don't you go back home? He's like, this is a lot. This is a lot for you. And on one level, I kind of do appreciate the teacher kind of saying, like, you don't have to shoulder this burden yourself. You're 17, you're paying rent, you're trying to feed yourself. It's a lot for an adult to do on their own. It's almost like the teacher is saying, like, you don't have to grow up this fast. You can enjoy high school while you're here. You don't have to be an adult too soon. The sad part about it is that the teacher doesn't exactly know the relationship that Ray has with Kyoko and with Koda. So even though the teacher kind of knows Koda, he doesn't know their relationship. So even though the teacher is thinking he's doing well and suggesting him going back home, for Ray, if he's already depressed, if he goes back home, it's going to be like the ultimate form of giving up and running away. And that's why, and we're going to get to that discussion in this episode about Ray starting to realize, like, what is he doing? What is he doing? Because in Ray's mind, if he goes back home, that is running away from the problem. And you're just going back down the ladder, which he had the dream of going up the escalator. You can't go down. So he's like, if I go back down, this whole thing could fall apart. And then Ray's depression could just climax. And we don't want that to happen. So basically the next step, though, is what? Where do we go to from here? What is the next step? That is the question. And this is kind of in the area where Ray is stuck at right now. We're at this part of the ladder where he's just trying to be self-sufficient, but it's like, well, what do you do now? What is the whole point? We're going to kind of go through some scenarios that Ray has in this episode. But so let's talk about this. Man, Shimada is amazing. I freaking love Shimada. I love how lanky he is, the lanky arms and everything. I realized this episode who he reminds me of, and that's why I was like, why am I attracted to him? He's not really my type. But he reminds me of Oikawa from Haikyuu. And hear me out, because a lot of you will be like, Oikawa, that peacock, he reminds you of him? But how he reminds me of Oikawa is he's not loud and proud like Oikawa is, but he's like the antithesis of prodigies. And Oikawa is the antithesis of prodigies. Oikawa's big story in IQ, without spoiling anything, really, is that he's a hard worker. He's not a prodigy. He's a hard worker, and he works hard, and he's smart, and he's skillful, and he's talented, but he's not a prodigy. And so he's the slow and steady wins the race is Oikawa's game. And that is Shimada. They describe him as somebody who's worked for everything he's gotten. So he seems, the difference between Shimada and Oikawa is Oikawa has this pride and this kind of effervescent peacockness to him that leads the fangirls to be like, oh my God, Oikawa. And he likes showing off, and he knows he's good. Shimada is much more reserved and very humble, and is just kind of like, yeah, no, I've just worked really, really hard to get here. It's almost like Shimada wants to be like Soya, who is the white-haired one, who's his master, which I'm so excited about. We're going to talk about Soya a little bit. But it's almost like he wants to emulate him and be him. So you have these characters that kind of, Soya is like the master. Soya is the top boss, right? And it seems that Soya's students were Shimada, and then by proxy, Nikaido. And I don't know if Soya is also Nikaido's teacher. We don't know for sure yet. And then over here we have Goto, which Goto seems to be kind of like he's after Soya as well. And then we have Koda, who's also kind of after Soya as well too. And then there's Rei here. The thing of it is, it seems like all of these characters all have these goals of either getting to Soya or rising up the ranks. Rei is kind of stuck here in ambitionless land, where he's realized he has some form of ambition, but he doesn't know where to aim it at. So that's kind of where, and I do agree that the workshop would be good. And I do agree with the teacher when the teacher's like, you should, go to a workshop with your opponent. You can learn from your opponent. It was giving me very Haikyuu vibes this episode, because they have like the training camps in Haikyuu where you go and face against your opponents and you work together, so you learn from them, and then you can translate that onto the court later on during the sporting event. So I feel like there is a lot to be said for that and to learn from it. But Ray's problem is he has depression. That's the big thing. And nobody really knows the extent that it is. Like, it is such an extent of depression. And, like, he's teetering on an edge. And I feel like, I know why Nikaido, he's like, you need to give Kiriyama a wake-up call. Because I feel like Nikaido is almost like, Shimada, you have to beat Rei, or Rei is going to just be completely demolished mentally by Goto. And he's not ready for that. Rei isn't strong enough. He doesn't have a strong enough fortitude to face Goto yet. He was getting the cart before the horse, and it crushed him, right? But I love Shimada. He's so cool. I freaking love him. He's like, oh, you finally woke up, but it was too late. I love it. I love how innocently Nikaido's like, I want you to split his head in half. I was like, and Nikaido says that with such earnestness, because he's like, I need Rei to wake up and realize that thinking he's going to jump right to the second level boss when he's not even ready for the first level. He's like, Rei needs a wake up call. I need you to give it to him before he gets really hurt. Because I feel like Shimada is something that Rei can bounce back from, even though it's really awful this episode. He's like such a troublesome thing. Blinding Darkness is so good. I also like Shimada. Shimada also is very handsome because he has these like moments where he just smiles, and it's very soft and it's very compassionate and almost blinding, but there's also like this darkness to it where you just can't place it, right? It's like looking at a UFO. Essentially, you don't know what you're looking at, and you don't know how to take it and how to read it, because Goto's pretty easy to read. Goto's like, I don't like you, or I'm being arrogant, or I'm being, a boss bitch. That's what I'm doing. Shimada's very hard to read because you're not sure, like, is he happy? Is he mad? What emotions is he feeling? Because he doesn't exude this particular aura, right? But he's very mysterious. Maybe that's another reason too. But at this point, he's like, yeah, I'm going to beat you. I've already beaten you, and you're just now realizing what's going on. And at that point, Rei's like, I'm done. Like, he's like, I can't continue. He's already put me into a corner. And I had this wave of embarrassment. What's interesting is in this episode, we have the blinding darkness, where it's like the water, the sunlight filtering off the surface of the water that creates this blinding light. But then when you sink below it, it's just murky and deep, and it's just darkness. That's what it seems like to me. And then the second half of the episode's called Just a Little Water. It's like Ray is at this point where he's not ready to go to the next level, right? He's not ready yet. Up until this point, this part here was all just raw talent. Like, that got him to be the 5th middle schooler to be promoted to a professional shogi player. This Paul up here, this was just raw talent and luck. And it got him there. And I don't want to say it's just raw talent and luck, because he did work his ass off studying. And I don't want to discount that and say, oh, well, it wasn't his hard work. It was his hard work. But his talent can get him so far. But there's also another aspect about this that we're missing out on, and that Ray is not really accessing from what we've seen in the episodes, and that he's not ready for a number of reasons. And one is socializing, which we'll talk about with the whole high school thing, is that Ray doesn't socialize. Yeah, he hangs out with Smith sometimes at the shogi hall, and yeah, he sometimes sees Issa and Smith at the bar, but Ray does not network. Ray does not want Nikaido around. He doesn't want other shogi players around. It's just like, we talked about earlier on in the series how shogi players like play one another and they practice with one another to get better. And he kind of was doing that for a little bit with Nikaido. The problem is Nikaido has an illness that keeps him from being able to come all the time, and he doesn't want to talk about it. Less not to, Ray. So Ray needs to socialize. He needs to go to this workshop. He needs to talk with other shogi players. Like, it's one thing to sit there and read playbooks all day and study them. That will get you so far. But to get to the next level, you have to really get into the psyche and the heads of your opponents. You need to learn what their styles are. You need to figure out what your own style is and what kind of shogi player are you. Like, Ray needs to do that. And he's just not at that point, right? And then he talks about being embarrassed by saying, just a minute ago, what did I think he was? And he's like, matches against people like that are drawn out battles. He's like, I completely underestimated him. I labeled him as just a side character, as just somebody I could walk over to get to the final round. I love that series said that line where he's like, I was treating him like a side character. When it's like, no, you have the battles right in front of you. Like we said last episode, it's classic case of you cannot predict the future. You cannot say, oh, I'm going to make it to the final round and not be present in the moment. If you're not present in the moment, it will be snatched up like you just like that. And that's exactly what happened to him. I just thought he would get over. I thought he would be able to get there anyway, but no, I was wrong. So there's a socializing aspect of it, but also what this episode does is it describes for Ray, it's a sense of control over himself and his purpose. And his purpose and feelings on shogi. Because on the one hand, you have the idea that when he's in a losing match, and I'm going to draw it over here so that y'all can see it a little bit better, right? So here's the situation. It's like Ray has confidence, and he's like a storm. He's like a storm. He has confidence. He's just like comes in billowing, ready to go, ready to flourish, ready to thrive. And as long as he's doing good in the match, it's okay. But what happens is the moment that he starts to lose, it's the equivalent of him drowning. The moment he starts to lose, it's like he's drowning, and he can't find a way to swim and get back to the surface, and it ends up being a quagmire, and it's too late, and he can't get out. And the problem with that is that it leads him into this depression. He's not a sore loser per se, but he doesn't know how to handle the loss, and he takes the loss so personally that he gets onto himself in this episode. It's not necessarily that he's a sore loser, but he feels so bad because he underestimated his opponent that he's like, I was an idiot. Why did I do that? And he's so self-loathing about it that it leads him to this depression that completely dehydrates him. So there's no balance right now, is basically it. And he's a teenager, right? So balance is hard for teenagers, but there's no balance. Either he's drowning or he's dehydrated. there's just like he's drowning in shogi because he thinks so deeply into it and overthinks it and then gets wrapped up in it. But then the moment he takes himself away from it, he's dehydrated because he needs it back in his life again. But the depression is a barrier, and his inexperience is a barrier, and his like trying to figure out his self-confidence is a barrier. And it's just, and the thing about it is all of these things happening are so relatable because Ray's a teen. And these are all things that teenagers go through, is this idea of getting overwhelmed and then feeling like you're not satisfied, but then finding that balance, finding where do you find yourself and what do you do? And the idea that he talks about in this episode about how I thought when I became an adult, it would just get easy. Oh no, it gets harder. That's the problem. That's the problem. Everybody when they're young, you think, oh, once I'm an adult, I'll have it all figured out and nothing will be a problem anymore. No, it just gets infinitely more complicated once you become an adult. Everything gets more complicated. And that whole line where he's like, I just thought I wouldn't have to cry anymore. I was like, well, damn it, show, what are you doing? Making me want to cry. I was like, no, you still cry as an adult. Sometimes a lot, but I'm like, oh, Ray, sweetheart. But yeah, he's like, I was an idiot. I completely underestimated him. I can't get irritated. He's like, I was arrogant. I wanted to win, so I drew the game out, waiting for him to make a mistake, thinking he was going to. I thought of him as a player for nothing more than his ranking. Yeah, his ranking, he's like, oh, I'll just print out all of these score charts and look at it and figure out my opponent and all this. And he got schooled. And I feel like this is the first, and it should have been, we should have seen it coming for a number of reasons. One, because the last several opponents that Ray had, he managed to beat them. And so we kind of got lulled into a false sense of security of, oh, Ray's got this in the bag. He's a side character. No, he's one of the major ones, I feel, alongside Goto. I feel like Goto and Kota and Shimada are three of the major characters. Yeah, I feel like Shimada just flies under the radar because that's his intent. But the other thing that was a major death flag in this episode was from the last episode, last week, where Ray was so focused on Goto. He was just looking ahead, not being present in the moment, and it completely derailed him. And I don't feel, I mean, I get how Ray feels where he's like, I feel ashamed. Like, I feel embarrassed. And I love the metaphor of him at the surface of the water where it's shimmering and blinding, but he's underwater drowning at the same time. Oh my God. Like, the metaphor of it's beautiful. And it's just, I like the idea of Shimada where you have Goto as the black water, the black river, like just making you slowly sink. With Shimada, it's dazzling, right? And you get blinded and you can't see, right? Oh, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. So it's great. It's interesting indeed. He's like, it's pitch black, but it's also blinding. And I can't believe that he just, I love that the one guy taking the timer and the moves just like looks over to Ray, because Ray kind of lost it. Ray had a moment of breakdown right there in front of them, and Shimada's like, are we good? And the timer's like, are you okay, man? But then Ray can't do anything. And he's like, he saw through me. And if I ran away in the middle of the game, it was because I was mortified. And he lost. I love how the loss is done too. He doesn't say he lost. He's just like, let's go over the discussion. And the thing about it was, he set that whole thing up from the very beginning. He's like, yep, here's where I won. And it was like 2 moves in. And Ray's like, And that was such a slap, I think. Again, the splitting the head in half for Ray, because Ray was just like, well, where did I go wrong? And Shimada's like, at the beginning. And it's like, oh shit. It's like, you were done from the start. You didn't have a chance. And he's like, I would have just done this and this. And it's like, oh. And it's just experience. It's the idea. I like that Shimada says, yeah, this season I've only played 5 games instead of Goto's 20. So it looks like Goto's the heavier hitter. He's like, but it seems like Shimada is more, Goto seems like he steamrolls his opponents by sheer dominating force, his manliness. And then Shimada's just like, I'm gonna be like a fox and kind of come in and kill the hens when you're not looking. That seems like his strategy. Because he's like, yeah, Goto played 20 games, so of course he seems like the bigger threat. But I played 5 and won. And I'm an A-ranked player, so yeah. He's like, yeah, I'm pretty high up there. I like that he's like, I'm kind of a big deal, but he doesn't brag about it. It's very humble. I do feel so bad for Ray, though. Because he's like, he just didn't realize how he just walked in and the match was already over. And I just feel bad. And the thing about it is like Shimada and Smith had that conversation where Smith is like the poor kid. I like that the adults in this world are like, he's a kid. He's learning. He's going to figure it out. We've been playing shogi for years, you know. And that's kind of one thing I like about this series too. I like that this series, it treats its child prodigies the age that they are. It's like, yeah, you have all this amazing raw talent and natural ability, and you're really good at this, but you're up against all these older players who may not have the talent, but they've got the experience. And eventually that's gonna come into play, and you can still get beaten by a lesser talented, more experienced player. I like it. It kind of ties into I'm watching Freerun Beyond Journey's End, and there's kind of in one of the recent episodes, there's kind of an arc about how there's so many different ways to do magic in that world that everybody comes about it differently, and just because you may be the strongest doesn't necessarily mean you're unbeatable. And that's kind of like Ray's resolved himself to be strong, and that's great, but at the same time, there's all these other factors he's learning about by playing other players that he hadn't taken into account before. Right? And it's one of those things, I think the teacher's correct. It's like, you're not going to know until you play and work with these stronger people. You're not going to get better otherwise. If you keep doing, it almost seemed like at the moment, Ray was doing these matches just to win, but not to grow, right? That's the next step, right? He's been doing all these matches against people that have not been very strong, and while it's boosted his confidence and while it's allowed him to keep playing and keep his rank, he's not growing from it. It's keeping him stagnant. So he needed this loss against Shimada to be like, okay, now where do I go to from here? The problem is he hasn't gotten that point. And I do kind of like Shimada being, it almost seemed like Shimada was speaking from experience, where he tells Nikaido, he's like, no. He's a baby deer. We got to put the bird seed in our hand and hold it out and wait for him to come to us. If we try to force it on him, he will run away. We can't force it on him. We got to let him come to us. When it's on his terms, that's how we got to do this. If we force it, it's just going to cause him to bust. We can't do that. So I like that Smith says that he came here to practice, and he's like, oh, Issa and I were discussing your match. I'm like, where are you now? Where are you? Where are you discussing his match? Where are you now? Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And then, yeah, he feels bad for Ray. Poor Ray. And him just crying. It's like, I was waiting for him to go to the park and just scream. And maybe he did scream and they just didn't show us in the moment in the episode. Maybe that was it. I don't know. But I felt so bad for Ray because he took this really hard. With his inexperience, he misjudged his opponent's level. The rashness of youth. They just draw Smith and Shimada so well. He's like, that punk only made copies of Mr. Goto in your game records. And then he's like, I bet he focused on how Goto has 20 games and I only have 5. And Smith's like, yeah, kind of. And he's like, well, that kid pisses me off too. That's so funny to me that they all like, my dog wants me to play, but not anymore. But yeah, he's like, I've done something similar in the past, so I can't be too mad at him. He's like, I want to win, but he's scary. Goto's face anyway. I kind of want to see the match between Goto and Shimada, but I don't know if they're going to show it to us or not. Part of me feels like they're not going to show us what the match is going to end up at. They're just going to say it. Part of me says that next episode they're just going to say that Goto won. He probably will win, but interesting. Or they could do something where they don't reveal who the winner was, and because Ray was so depressed he didn't watch the final match, and then if he goes to the workshop, Shimada might be like, well, I lost to Goto, but here I'm still here, and I'm still playing, so what do you do? But what does he say there? He says after Smith, it's like Goto's not really who Shimada wants to face. He's kind of like Ray a little bit, where he's like, I want to win and then play against Soya. I love that shot of him with the smoke behind him, where it's like the white light and there's the smoke and he's like silhouetted in black. That's a really good shot. And then, so he's kind of like Ray in that regard. He's like the title match. So whoever wins the final gets the title match with Soya. Who has a snow motif. I think that's really interesting for Soya to have. I don't know where that is. Sorry, Huck. I don't know where your toy is. I feel like Soya is so mysterious and fascinating to me. You have Ray, who is like Ray and Kyoko and all of them. What is he doing? I don't see it, buddy. Nope. I don't see what you're trying to get me to look at. Nope. So I feel like with Soya, he's so mysterious. And you have Ray and Kyoko, who are like these storms, right? And even to an extent, you have Goto, who feels like a storm himself. But then Soya is so quiet. He's so like when you think of snow, when I think of snow, I think of softness and I think of quiet. Like it's the polar opposite of a storm, right? Like even the winds of a snowstorm, when they're like howling, it's just like it's very like quiet and kind of almost like a whisper. And you have a storm that's like raging and blowing and in your face and loud. And snow seems like the exact opposite. It almost seems silent. So there's like a calm there that's so fascinating to me. I feel like Soya, and you know what the funny part is that normally with characters that are the final bosses, they're like these big torrents and larger than life and colossal antagonists. But then Soya seems the polar opposite. He just seems like, I'm just playing shogi. And I'm just really freaking good. It's like, he seems like it will be effortless, which is fascinating. It almost seems like Shimada is trying to emulate that with Soya during his own matches, even if he's not totally like that in reality. So I find that interesting. We see all of these different players being influenced by the people they admire and look up to. But Shimada is kind of like Ray, where he has a goal. And so I think that Goto's going to beat Shimada because he's doing the same thing that Ray is doing, where he wanted to play Soya. And so I think that if Ray goes to the workshop and talks to Shimada's going to tell him that. He's going to be like, hey, remember how you probably want to face Goto in the final and it caused you not to be present in the moment? Yeah, I wanted to face Soya in the title match. I was thinking so much about it. I wasn't focusing on the opponent in front of me. I made the same mistakes that you did. Look at, we both can learn from it. I feel like that needs to be the case, right? That they have that conversation. So when Shimada asks him to go out and eat with him, he's like, oh, I've got something. He's like, what, do you have a girlfriend? And Smith's like, no, I'm not into ladies. But I was almost going to say that he was going to go out and eat with Issa or something. But no, instead he goes home to Strawberry, Ichigo, his little cat. Oh my God. But yeah, before we get to him seeing Strawberry, we do have Shimada calling Nikaido. Of course Nikaido's watched the game online. Of course he's already seen it. Of course he's already made documented notes. Of course he has. But Nikaido wants him to go to the workshop. And he's like, I don't know if I cracked open his head. But he's like, I know what you're talking about with Ray. He's like, do you think we should invite him to join the workshop? So yeah, then Smith goes home. Oh my God. Him with that little cat. Oh my God. Him giving the little kissy faces. Absolutely adorable. Oh my God. It's drawn so cute. Oh my God. I love it so much. He's like, we're time for your num-nums. Oh my God. Freaking hilarious. Him with his cat. Yeah, Smith is at the very least bisexual for me, but I love it. So just a little water. Whereas I like the idea of Ray growing as a person and growing as a player, sometimes growing is hard and it sucks. And these are some of those moments where it breaks my heart and my soul to see Ray going through his depression. And just when you think and that's so true of depression though, from people that I've talked to that have it, just when you think you're doing really well, it can come out of nowhere and just smack you. And you're like, ugh, back to square one, it feels like. And just him being so upset and depressed and feeling like he's no good, that he literally doesn't eat or drink. What bothers me is Ray is not healthy. And I feel like the siblings, the sisters kind of know that, but they don't know it enough to help be able to help him. And it's one of those things where, yeah, at some point Ray is going to have to be self-sufficient, but I wish other people knew how bad it was so that they could assist him, right? I feel like there's going to be a moment where Ray gets to where he has to be like hospitalized or something, and that's when everybody's going to realize how bad it is. And I don't want it to get to that point, but I'm fearful that it is going to get to that point, which is scary. I know exactly what Ray is going through, though, because one, I have been so sick before that you just, like, I used to get migraines that were really bad all the time. And when you get a migraine, it just makes you nauseous, like you want to throw up. And then, but the problem is when you eat something or drink something, it just agitates that, and your head hurts so much that you don't want to eat or drink. But then if you don't eat or drink, you get dehydrated. So then you do have to eat or drink, but then you throw it back up, and it's this big continuous cycle. It's like if you've ever been so hungover. I also used to I don't drink hardly at all anymore because the hangovers were just so bad. It was like my body was trying to like purge everything to restart itself. And then you couldn't drink anything for like a day, but then you got dehydrated. But then it just created a big cycle. So everything Ray goes through with the whole idea of, I had never thought of the water with the salt. I'd always been told like, you know, like a Sprite or a ginger ale or something with like some fizz. I'd never thought about salt water. So that's interesting. But I guess the salt water is to make you keep drinking more water. Because like we've done that with cattle before. You put a little salt in their water, it makes them drink. But yeah, the idea that he's just sitting in his apartment and he's just drowning. The idea that the water represents his depression, but he lives by the river because it's beautiful. Show, what are we doing? Oh my God, show. It's insanity. I do appreciate that he gets himself out of his depression enough to like go get food and everything, and he's trying. He's like, I'm trying to get better. He tries to get himself out of it. But that line where he says, he's like, this is bad, what should I do? He's like, I had a faint memory of slowly lapping up water with salt. He's like, it took me half a day to summon the energy just to get up. And I crawled to the convenience store. He's like, I'm an idiot. I'm even terrible at depression. That line, I'm even terrible at depression, is the saddest thing I have seen on this show so far. It's so horrible. But you see like him getting in his cart, like just getting just food to nourish himself back to health. But bless his heart, he looks, I feel so bad for him. Like he looks really, really, he has like a Victorian waifishness to him when he's like looking at the job magazines. Like he's so handsome there, but he also looks kind of sickly. And it's just like the job work magazines. I didn't know what they were at first. I couldn't read fast enough to see what they were at first to know. I thought they were maybe just like free magazines and he was just getting them for recreation. But it makes me sad that he's looking at, I'm kind of torn between him looking at the job magazines, because on the one hand, I do like the idea that we kind of have this offshoot, right? So the thing that is in the way right now is high school and this idea of not being ready. So he can go two directions after he's out of high school. He can keep going with shogi, or he can get a job. And that's an interesting dynamic that I'm excited to see what the story goes with that, because he's got 2 years left technically. That's a long time. It's not a long time, and it is a long time. It's enough time for him to maybe turn over a new leaf and realize that he wants to keep doing shogi, but it's also an idea that he's not bound to it. I like the idea that Ray is realizing he is not bound to shogi for the rest of his life. If he doesn't want to play it and he keeps drowning in it and he can't get himself out of it and it's causing more toxicity than good, he can get out. The problem is, you know, what does he do then? Is that going to necessarily make him happy? Because is he happy with shogi? So that's going to be the question in 2 years. Does shogi bring him happiness? And does he want to keep doing it? Will he regret it if he doesn't? Right? I don't think there's anything wrong with changing your dreams. I don't think there's anything wrong with being really good at something and having to start something new. I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think that as humans, we evolve and develop as we go. So why, I think it's not a bad thing to feel like you don't have to be boxed in to something the rest of your life, right? So it's kind of like one of those things where if you're a good baseball player and somebody's like, oh, well, you should be a professional baseball player. What if you get in there and you get burnt out? Does that mean that you're a failure? I think that's an interesting conversation to have. And now my dogs are going to play with each other. So my Huckleberry's going to bark. You'll have to excuse him. But I think it's a good thing that Ray is realizing that there are other options out there, because I feel like if you do get burnt out and burnout happens, you shouldn't feel ashamed of trying something different. I don't think there should be any shame in that. So I appreciate that. But in the same vein, what I think is going to happen is that he's going to eventually appreciate shogi and keep doing it. I think is what's going to happen. Right now, he's in that depression mode where he's like, oh, nope, I lost this one match, and it was a big match, and so I'm rethinking everything, but I can't do anything. And that's like another layer of his depression. He can't go out and get a job because he has to graduate high school, which I want to question that real quick, because I mentioned Given earlier. When he's on the steps of the school, it reminded me of a scene from the anime Given. In Given, one of the big aspects, and if you don't know what Given is, it's a BL series, but it's also a high school kind of slice of life coming of age story. But in that series, one of the plot lines, one of the side plot lines is that the main character, he has a job after school. He has several jobs. He works in a grocery store, and he helps a moving company alongside one of his band members. It's like a band anime, so there's like music, instruments, and all that. But he's in high school. He has 2 jobs that he works part-time, but they're part-time jobs after school. So maybe the idea is that they're just part-time jobs, and he lives at home, so he's not he can afford to have 2 part-time jobs because he still lives at home with his family, so he doesn't need enough money to pay the rent, but the money he's making is going towards his band. I guess that's the situation, is that Ray's looking at full-time jobs, and the full-time jobs want you to have a high school diploma. Maybe that's it. Because otherwise I was like, well, he could go out and get a job. But again, we can't exactly read. It says high school graduates 18 and older, and he's 17, and he's not a high school graduate yet. He's like, the only way a student like me can earn money to pay rent, yes, is to continue playing shogi. And so there is kind of I could see where his depression would get fueled sometimes by shogi, because he feels kind of stuck on this rung of the ladder. He can't advance yet for all these reasons, so he's just kind of stuck in this one spot, and there's no other ladders. Huckleberry, be nice. There's no other ladders for him to jump to, so it's a problem. So I could definitely see why he's depressed. It makes me want to just give them the biggest hug. I want to just be like, I want to hug Ray and tell him it's going to be okay. And then the other thing of the matter is school. And Ray, because of all the shogi that he plays, because of all the matches that'll cause him to miss school, and because he's kind of introverted and he doesn't really feel like a 17-year-old kid, he feels like he's had to grow up so fast and be in this adult world. He can't relate to any of his classmates. He can't really, it's like him being in high school feels like he's just playing being in high school. It doesn't feel real. And part of it's him, saying I don't want to feel like I'm running away. That's kind of the other thing I wanted to talk about, was he talks about how he doesn't want to run away. And he feels like Kyoko was almost challenging him, being like, well, you're just pretending to be in high school. Why are you even there? And he's like, I don't want to run from high school. He's like, I want to say that I'm not a quitter. But at the same time, is he a high schooler, or is he just going through the motions without any rhyme or reason, just floating? I think that bothers Ray too, because he's like, on the one hand, he gets so dedicated and serious about shogi that it kind of consumes everything around him, which means that for everything else, he just kind of floats through. He just kind of like, yeah, I just got to go through the motions and get through this, but he's not stopping and savoring it. And I think that he's realizing this episode, he's like, what am I doing? Why am I not taking advantage of high school? These are the only 2 years I'm going to be here. Why am I not getting more involved? Why am I just floating through this? Am I an idiot? What am I doing? And he's questioning all these things about himself, and I feel for him. It's really, really sad. And bless his heart, he can't play basketball. He's like, he's like, I wanted memories of not running away, but is me just going through the motions and just half-assing it, is that not running away, or is that just taking the easy road out? And what's the solution? How do I focus on high school when I'm trying to do shogi at the same time? How do I, and another layer of it too that I just thought of before starting this discussion, another reason he feels so bad is that he pushed away the sisters and like that time he could have spent with them to focus on shogi, but he's stuck in this rut and he can't advance. So he's just like, well, I ruined that opportunity of being able to hang out with them and be with Momo because I told her, oh no. It almost feels like I think Ray believes he let them down, because he's like, I've let them down because I forewent spending time with them because I said I had to study for this match and then it didn't pay out. So was it a waste of my time? And I'm not taking advantage of high school because I'm playing shogi, so am I wasting time? But I can't, he's in this cycle of I can't enjoy high school because I have to play shogi, and I can't play shogi unless I focus on it, but I can't hang out with anybody else unless I focus on it, and it's just, I feel for our boy a lot. So then, and you see all these kids like in high school all in groups, hanging out together, and he's like, I thought I'd be able to handle this. He's like, but I'm just imitating being a high school student. He's like, I thought if I could leave home, pay rent, and feed myself, that I would become an adult and I wouldn't have to cry anymore. But that's not the case. This moment here reminds me of the film Grave of the Fireflies, which is literally one of the saddest movies I've ever watched. And when the teacher here says, you know, it's too much for you to handle on your own, you need to go back home, I get why Ray doesn't want to do that, but he's going to have to do something. In Grave of the Fireflies, one of the plot points is that this boy and his sister, they get estranged from their family, and they have some distant relatives, and the relationship with the distant relatives is kind of like the relationship with Kyoko and Koda. It's not great, and it's not a great environment. So just like Ray, the brother and sister leave the relatives being like, this is not a good environment, we need to get away. But the problem is that was literally their security and safety net, and they can't sustain themselves on their own is the problem. And they don't want to go back. They're too, and there's a sense of pride in that. There's pride where Ray doesn't want to go back because he's like, no, I've made this commitment. I'm going up this ladder. If I go back down, like, that's going to be a blow to his pride even more and cause him to be even more depressed. But at the same time, he's got to change something about the environment that he's in, or he's going to drown or die of starvation. One of the two. He's either going to be malnourished or he's going to drown. And I don't know. And the solution, it's like, he's like, I could go stay with the sisters, but in doing that, it's so cozy and content that I'm not going to grow. I need to get to the top of the ladder before I stay with them. I got to get to the top of the ladder where I want to go, and then I can stay with them. Right? Or at least that's what his thinking is. And I don't know if the answer is for like him to move in with Nikaido, or Nikaido to like stay with him, or what, but he needs a support system, and maybe the workshop will give that to him. Maybe the workshop will provide that, a support system for him that he needs, but something has to change. Ray is slowly making changes to himself, which are good, but the environment is still dragging him down, and something has to change. And I do appreciate the teacher trying to help him. I appreciate the teacher realizing, being like, you need to eat something hot. I love, he's like, you're gonna lose half your hit points if you don't eat something hot. And it's like, I feel like he was like a D&D player back in high school, which is super cute. But yeah, I do like the idea of him eating the hot meal to help. And he's like, why don't you move back to your mentor's house? And he keeps on saying, well, but no, but he's like, you need to do something. And Ray's like, I don't want to go back. And so then the teacher kind of backtracks, being like, well, maybe it's not my business. But he's like, I watched the tournament online, and he's like, he came up with Master Stoya, but never stood out. So yeah, Shimada and Stoya have been together for a while. And honestly, the teacher's like, look, you lost against somebody really strong. He's the definition of hard work. You underestimated him. It's not the end of the world. You'll learn and be fine. He's been regular at all the title matches. He's like, we're the same age, so I'm curious. I like when he says I'm curious. He's like, you know, I might be curious about a lot of things about these men that are my own age. He's got a workshop where he helps train young players. He's like, why don't you go to that? And he's like, Nikaido goes to it. He's like, Nikaido seems like he's doing pretty well. Why don't you try that? He's like, why not? It would be a waste not to go. You should learn from your opponents. It's a huge opportunity. And I was like, all you've been saying is but, and but. He's like, if 100 butts opened a door, that'd be fine, but there isn't a door like that. He's like, you need to take initiative. You needed to go do it. And of course, Ray's like, but it's just like part of Ray's depression is that he can think of all these reasons not to do something rather than thinking of all of the possibilities that can come from doing something. And that's just a mindset, and it's very relatable. Like, I know a lot of people can relate to Ray and the struggles. He's like, no more butts. And then we have Nikaido and Shimada, and Nikaido. If it were up to Nikaido, he would have drove to Ray's apartment, picked him up, slung him over his shoulder, coughed up some blood, and took him to that workshop. He would have already been there, already done it. But Shimada's like, nah. When you handle baby deer, you got to handle with care. You got to hold that food out gently, and you got to lure him in. And I feel like Shimada knows that Ray's going to come. Ray's going to get the fire. It's just a matter of time. What I love about Shimada is that he honestly, every time we see him, he doesn't look depressed. He's always smiling. He looks like he has this like little light to him, even though he's very quiet and calm. It's actually really, really cool. But yeah. I want him to go to that workshop so bad. I want to see what it's like. I want him and Nikaido to hang out again. Why can't we have these things? But this episode was not what I was expecting, and it was really, really good. I want to talk about the end card real quick. The style of it is intriguing. I like the way that Goto's drawn, and I like the way that Soya is drawn. Soya looks like Ray. He looks so much like Ray. It's kind of insane. And the only one I don't like is Shimada looks so like, Shimada's with the black hair. I like him with the brown hair instead. And his eyes aren't green enough, but Ray looks really good. The illustrator of this is Koji Mori, who is the man that's like Miura's best friend and took over Berserk after Miura passed. So knowing this is the art style, all right, I could see it. I don't know if Koji is trying to imitate Shaft in this and it's not quite his art style, or if it is. I'm on board, but it's a really good end card. I love the way that Soya is drawn. I'm kind of obsessed with it. That side profile, I'm kind of obsessed. But yeah, I'm so curious about Soya. I'm very curious about Shimada. I like Shimada a lot. I want to see more with him and Ray throughout this, and I like the idea of Shimada as this mentor, as this teacher, that he just has this like quiet patience to him that I really, really like. But yeah, kudos to March for being unlike anything I was expecting. Are we surprised? So in any case, I'm excited to hear your comments down below and your thoughts. I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and yeah. I'll be back very soon with more March Comes In Like a Lion. Bye!